Mr. President, I rise today with two of our colleagues, Senator Markey and Senator Jeff Merkley, to reflect on the 24th session of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that concluded just this last weekend in the country of Poland. This important conference, which is better known as COP24, COP24, which I believe refers to Conference of Parties 24, met there for the past, and I think they've been doing that for 24 years, but met there for 2 weeks as leaders from nearly 200 nations worked to reach agreement on how the world, our world, will actually implement the Paris Climate Agreement. The stakes could not be higher, Mr. President. I'm not one, as my colleagues know, I'm not one giving to hyperbole, but the future of our planet and the future of our children and our grandchildren may well hang in the balance. Was it a positive step forward that the international community could come together and agree to meaningful action to combat climate change on a global scale by finally beginning to implement the Paris agreements? Yes, it was. But having said that, this agreement is not perfect. They know it, we know it. No one's pretending that it is. It falls well short of the steps that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, determined just 1 month ago are needed to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change over the next decade. The entire world needs to do even more to address this problem. That includes setting much more aggressive emissions targets going forward to address the challenges of climate change in the years ahead. While we certainly can and should be doing more, though, this agreement is cause for hope that bolder future agreements are achievable. But reaching bolder future agreements, Mr. President, is going to require real leadership from leaders and from nations across the world. After all, leadership is the biggest key to success for almost any organization or any endeavor, and that includes saving this planet. Unfortunately, our president, along with many in his administration, continue to reject climate science and deny the reality and the magnitude of the challenges that we're facing. Well, Mr. President, here's the reality. According to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. experienced 16 extreme weather-related disasters in 2017 that exceeded $1 billion apiece. In the past year alone, Americans paid $306 billion in damages due to storm surges, flooding, wildfires, crop freezes, and droughts, a new record. 13 of our nation's leading scientific federal agencies recently reported to us in the National Climate Assessment that if we do nothing to address our carbon emissions, today's extreme weather-related events will pale in comparison to what lies ahead. Here's a sampling of what we can look forward to if we do nothing, or if we don't do enough. In the future, we can continue to expect rainfall where precipitation is measured by the foot, not by the inch. We can continue to expect more wildfires in places out west, burning areas larger than my home state of Delaware. And we can continue to expect extreme flooding to devastate communities like Ellicott City, Maryland, not too far from here, which has been hit by not one but two 1,000-year floods in the past 2 years alone. Think about that. 2 in the past 2 years alone. Somebody asked me the other day, what is a 1,000-year flood? Well, that's something that's supposed to happen no more than once every 1,000 years. We've seen 2 of them. They've seen 2 of them in Ellicott City in the past 2 years. Mr. President, one of the most memorable lyrics from my youth, and maybe from some of the others in this chamber, come from a guy named Stephen Stills. I always describe him as a California-based climatologist. He's not. He's a singer-songwriter from Buffalo Springfield fame, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He once wrote a lyric. It goes, here it goes. It goes something like this. It says, something's happening here. Just what it is ain't exactly clear. Think about that. That's what he wrote. Something's happening here. Just what it is ain't exactly clear. Well, make no mistake, something is happening here. And what is happening here is exactly clear. What's also clear is that there's still time to do something about it while actually fostering economic growth in the U.S. and beyond our borders. Let me say that again. Here's the good news. What's also clear is that there's still time to do something about it while actually fostering economic growth in the U.S. and beyond our borders. Climate science isn't part of some grand hoax. This isn't some alarmist prediction. It doesn't come from some left-leaning organization. It doesn't come from talk radio. The truth of the matter is that it comes directly from our nation's leading scientists and from leading scientists around the world. Let me also remind our colleagues that the National Climate Assessment is not developed at the direction or whim of any one person or any one administration. It was Congress. It was Congress that passed a law mandating that the National Climate Assessment be presented every 4 years. We did it. Congress did it. That law was called the Global Change Research Act of 1990. It passed this United States Senate in 1990 unanimously. It was signed into law by the late President George Herbert Walker Bush, a Republican. Our nation's leading scientists warned us yet again, less than a month ago, that if we fail to start seriously reducing carbon emissions now, by the end of the century, we may well be witnessing the following tale of horribles. Here's a chart. First one deals with sea level rise, 6 feet. Since 1990, that's a lot. Since 1993, 3 inches. Compared to what we've experienced in the last, what would that be, 25 years? That is a heck of a lot. We would expect, if it does go to 6 feet in sea level rise, some $3.6 trillion in cumulative damages to the U.S. coastal properties and infrastructure. Most of our East Coast, a lot of it would be underwater. A lot of it would be underwater, including maybe parts of the lowest lying state in America, which is Delaware. Our next chart talks about annual economic losses of up to $500 billion, annual economic damages by 2090, not cumulative, but every year. $500 billion a year in economic damages. We have another chart here that speaks to gross domestic product. You may recall when we fell into the Great Recession around 10 years ago, the worst recession since the Great Depression, we saw GDP growth, GDP growth of just over 4%. It was horrible. It was terrible. Banks stopped lending money. Unemployment rate was 10% or more. People couldn't get loans for anything. And that's where we were. If these estimates from some of the best, smartest scientists in the world are correct, it's not going to be losses of 4.2%. We'll be looking at 10% by 2100. Now, no member of this Senate is going to be around then. But these pages sitting down here, they will be. A lot of them will be. And our sons and grandsons and granddaughters, they might well be around too. Yet as the world works to develop meaningful solutions to mitigate these effects of climate change, the Trump administration chooses to exacerbate the problem by doubling down on dirty and outdated energy policies. This administration is also attempting to discredit the recent science reports by pushing talking points from well-known climate deniers. Here's the good news, but Americans are not falling for these tricks anymore. Americans are witnessing firsthand the effects of climate change in their communities every day. They want action, and they want us to be part of that action. So does the business community. And while this administration sits on his hands, American businesses are actually stepping up in a big way to combat the effects of climate change. Many businesses stand ready to do even more. And they're looking to us here in our nation's capital to provide some leadership. To our international friends who around the world are wondering where our nation is on this climate change, I just want to say to those folks that speaking on behalf of the majority, not just the Delawareans, but Americans, we're with you. We are with you. We support the Paris Climate Agreement. We want to reduce carbon emissions because we're convinced that doing so will enable us to save our planet and create jobs. A lot of them. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is not a blue state or red state issue. It affects us all. And if you think that climate change hasn't reached your state yet, the science is clear that eventually it will. Well, luckily for us, young people are leading the call for action. Climate change or environmental issues are often mistakenly forgotten when we discuss domestic issues. In today's news cycle, especially under this administration, it doesn't always make headlines. It's oftentimes been said that climate change is not an issue that drives Americans to the poll. Well, Mr. President, I think that's changing. Young people have led the way in changing our country before. I remember when I was your age, I say to our pages. In the 1950s, we led the decades-long civil rights movement for equal rights for every American under the law. It was young activists who made clear their opposition to the Vietnam War. And back in the 1970s, when I was actually serving during the Vietnam War as a naval flight officer, young people pushed hard for strong environmental standards. When the Cuyahoga River, just north of, it's in Cleveland, runs through Cleveland, but just north of Ohio State where I went to school, it was on fire. And at the same time, we had shores of our country littered with garbage. Well, our country is back at another one of those make-or-break moments in our history. And we need the energy of Americans of all ages, young or old, to make sure we don't blow it. And we need to listen to them all, especially to our younger Americans, this generation of young Americans. And after all, when you think about it, they should be energized by this. It's their planet, and it's their future. When it comes to global challenges such as terrorism and cyber attacks, the U.S. doesn't sit back and wait for someone else to lead the way. We step up and we lead. And we have many dogs in this fight, Some big ones and some not so big ones. We got a lot of dogs in this fight. We got a lot at stake. Unfortunately, acting sooner rather than later on climate change brings with it a number of positives. We can put our country on course to reduce emissions while growing our economy. I keep coming back to this theme, and it's an important theme. We could put our country on a course to reduce emissions and grow our economy. The two are not mutually exclusive. I don't care what some people would say and have us believe. In fact, quite the opposite. They are not mutually exclusive. What we can and should be doing is using our energy and resources to foster new economic opportunities for communities that may depend today on the old world order. In 2017, nearly 3.2 million Americans were working in wind, in solar, energy efficiency, and other climate energy jobs. Until a year or two ago, one of them was one of our sons, our oldest sons. He worked for six years or so, helping develop ways for large buildings all over the Northeast to conserve energy. That's just one of the jobs. There were a lot more, 3.2 million more. More will follow, more jobs will follow, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that some of those new jobs go to people whose jobs are going away as we seek to reduce carbon emissions in this country and on our planet. How would we feel if we're losing our job and at the same time 3 million people had gained a job? And well, how about me? And I was born in West Virginia. Dad was a coal miner for a while, early in his life. How about those people? Well, we need to make sure that as we make progress in reducing carbon emissions, that the folks who lose their job because of their livelihood, because of the reduction of those carbon emissions, that we don't forget them. That we reach back and help them too. Well, let me just observe, we don't have the luxury of waiting around. We need to crank it up, and we need to get going. And that's why, as a senior Democrat and ranking member of the Committee on Environment and Public Works, where I serve along with Senators Markey and Merkley and others, I'm anxious to join them in helping lead the fight for policies that take this country into a brighter climate future. And if we're honest with our children and our grandchildren, we don't have any other choice, Mr. President. It was my hope that on the world stage this week, America's representative at COP24 would make clear that our country is ready to lead by example. Unfortunately, they apparently did not. But that's no reason to despair. We have the facts, and I think we have the energy and the commitment on our side. I want to leave our colleagues today with this message. Climate action should not be an issue that divides us. Climate change, climate action should not be an issue that divides us. It should be an issue that unites us. It should unite not just this country, but the entire global community. And our world could definitely use a little uniting these days. So could our country. Years from now, when my sons, or I should say our sons, my wife and our sons' children are dealing with the inevitable consequences of our failure to address climate change if we do fail. But there'll be a day when they might come to me, or frankly to any of us, and say, well, you were a United States Senator. You were a United States Senator. Weren't you, Grandpa? What did you do when you had the chance to do something about this impending disaster when there was still time? What did you do? What did you do about it? And we should all want to be able to say the same thing. I worked tirelessly. I worked tirelessly. Reminding, warning my colleagues, pushing our colleagues, that we moved heaven and earth to make sure that future generations could inherit a safe, a healthy planet, one where their dreams and aspirations could be realized and not destroyed. Or my colleagues and I, especially Senator Merkley today, are on the floor to make clear that the overwhelming majority of Americans stand with almost every other nation in the world on this issue. We need to act. We need to act now. Time is not on our side. Let's seize the day. Carpe diem. Let's seize the day. And I'm happy to yield the floor